Good morning, everyone. We are starting our panel discussion, Banks Point 4. We have been dubbed as a post-pandemic forum, and we really must mention what the banking sector has been facing in recent months. Let me begin by introducing our distinguished speakers. Some of them are with us, and some will communicate with us in the online format. Mr. Boris Titov is still with us. Mr. Anatoly Popov, Deputy Chairman of the Managerial Board of Sberbank. Heinrich Steinhauer, Chief Representative of Helaba Bank in Russia, Germany. Yelena Dibova, Vice President of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry of the Russian Federation. And we do hope that Tatiana Monaghan will be able to speak to us online, and Dr. Jörg Kramer, Chief Economist of Commerzbank Germany, as well as István Lengyel, Secretary General of the Banking Association for Central and Eastern Europe, Hungary. I would like to give the floor to Boris Yuryevich Titov. What do you think? How the financial sector and the banking sector in particular have been surviving through this COVID situation? Thank you. Today, indeed, we have this very special emotion because what we have experienced in recent months has demonstrated that the banking sector has been working in a particular tense regime. After all, banks, the whole sector is a very conservative one, but life itself has made them to respond immediately on the spot to the events as they emerge. On the other hand, the state would also dictate new demands. And in this situation, this so-called triangle, the state, the banks, and the business, not everyone has been happy with the situation, but I should say, as to business, they have the least complaints against banks, because banks have been doing their best to respond to new administrative demands. One of the first measures was the so-called zero crediting, and the state that announced this support measure back in April, on the 8th of April. Already on the 8th of April, as our commissioner's task, we monitored the situation nationwide, and we could see that there wasn't a single bank that could provide this easy term 8% interest credit in Russia. And this new measure by the state could not be satisfactory to any bank, because the central bank could only offer 4% as interest for this support measure, and the whole risk was imposed on the banking sector itself. And Then and there was an emergent decision that the WEB, which means the Economic Trade Bank, would offer additional support, and this kind of credit provision at 25% proprietary risk is really unrealistic. On the one hand, the state-owned commercial banks were able to provide this kind of easy-term credit with the commercial banks providing the smallest amount, and I could say that as to Sberbank, which is a commercial bank, was almost the same as that of the WEB bank, but it was due to their ability to use new assessment mechanisms for risk factors. When we asked the question of how you can support this risk, they had the ready answer, particularly the Sberbank, because of their application of IT technologies, which could use the new digital technologies and actually led the sector in providing easy-term credit. I won't dwell on this any longer, but it is a real challenge that faced the financial system, and gradually it was the government itself as well, the central bank and the commercial banks were learning in the process and tried to develop more commercially viable solutions. And I should say that as to restructuring the debt, refinancing the debt, the situation seems to be better. There were also requirements to provide easy-term credit for salary payments. So both the state and the banks were learning on the go, so to say, and as to what has emerged, there is a separate story for a strategic analysis. What is clear is that new technologies, digital technologies are drastically needed, but at the same time we must see the general trend in the economic development. The real statistics today often does not emerge from the state, but by separate banks indeed. We do not always rely on the data of the government statistical agency, so banks provide their own statistics. SMEs must develop higher productivity levels, introduce robotics, 3D printing, and what we are observing now is a trend from globalization to localization or to customization. But how could that actually work when the real sector SMEs could actually reach their target customers. I do believe the new economy will not take us unawares, and there will already be the necessary profits, and maybe some banks will agree to lower levels of income. Thank you, Boris Yurievich. I would like to invite the representative from the central bank. We can now communicate with Mikhail Mamuta, member of the board of directors of the Central Bank of Russia. Good morning, Mikhail Valerievich. Thank you for being able to join us. Our first question is, what is your view of the success that the central bank had in controlling the situation, in overcoming the difficulties and facing the challenges? How successful the bank has been? Are there any new solutions, ideas, and trends developed in the bank? I do believe you can both see and hear me. I do believe we have excellent connection. Yes, we do. Let me first say I'm grateful for being able to join this panel discussion. It's now the right time to sum up the events of the spring and summer, and maybe to outline some of the ideas for the future on further means and ways of facing and overcoming challenges. At the beginning of the pandemic, the situation was totally unprecedented, without any precedent in modern history, and we had to devise new mechanisms on the go and then adjust and readjust them. That could not be done without a high degree of interaction among the various participants of the whole process. What played a key role in the efficiency of our measures is the quality of our interaction with the business communication through the office of the Presidential Commissioner for Business Activity, both with at the federal level and on regional levels. The idea is that all the banks have set aside their own professional teams for contacting officials from different institutions, whatever the issue may be, either refinancing or is it a credit. As soon as we launched this new approach, a couple of weeks since the restrictions were introduced, we saw that it was a vital link between the bank itself and the different demand in the crisis situation. As to the more required and more popular measures, I should say that one such measure that allowed SMEs to remain solvent and avoid bankruptcy is our recommendations on interaction on credit holiday. and that enabled the worst hit sectors of the economy to obtain a payment debt holiday for the period of up to 6 months. It was important to survive through this period of uncertainty, and that was the most demanded measure of all. And as of the end of August, this was applied for by almost 100,000 entities of SMEs, and the total volume of credit available was 740 million overall. The measure has been introduced on a mass scale, and it has played a key role in the survival process. Additionally, the central bank launched the so-called 500 program, plus 500 billion rubles for additional crediting to the banks, and that was beneficial crediting those banks who managed not to decrease their crediting drastically, could obtain additional support from us at this low rate. And as Boris Yurievich mentioned before me, that there was yet another program, and 129 billion rubles have been required, and the 2% interest program has helped SMEs a lot as assisting the post-pandemic recovery process. Restriction measures precluded the business unusual, and we allowed the banking organizations to carry on a certain volume of their business in the online format, which showed almost a 9% growth in lending. We are not mentioning the actual crediting provided because there is a decrease in demand generally. But what we want is to restore the more or less normal level of crediting. So we enabled the banks to form their own reserves for refinanced crediting, and both SMEs and banks will then be able to gradually pass through this difficult stage. There was also a need for a timely adjustment of our credit policy, but let me conclude this part of my speech the following. If this kind of situation occurred had occurred some 20 years ago, the whole of the banking system would have been paralyzed. There was no digital technology, and interpersonal communication was the only way of doing business. Today, thanks to new technologies, we should say we have managed to overcome most of the challenges, if not altogether painlessly, but to a lesser degree of damage. And it was the digit that actually helped us, because none of the measures I mentioned above dictated the need for offline communication. They were all implemented in the online regime.
Mikhail, I have the following question. What you have been describing is the assistance from the state. What about the banks proper? They were introducing new methods, new instruments, for example, for example, letters of credit. How do you assess them? How do you assess the introduction of the letters of credit into this system of public procurement? How do you assess the initiative of the banks, not of the central bank? Well, we had a dialogue with banks on a permanent basis, including the Sberbank. I think it has been very intensive, like with all the other banks. What have we seen from the banks? A great desire to help the small and medium businesses, the small and medium enterprises, because nobody wants to lose clients, and the banks did their best to find the ways of restructuring credits, adjusting the terms. Online assessment was introduced for soft loans. So the support of the credit sector could materialize because the banks could implement them, and there was such a program. If we speak about the future, I believe that the topic of digital factoring is very promising. To begin with, factoring should be developed as a credit model, but so far it has been undervalued. Its scale potentially is vast. If you look at the schemes of funding trade in Europe and in America, it's hundreds of billions. In our country, it's so far a very modest development. And I think that the central bank announced it some time ago, but its implementation will be very important, and it will introduce new instruments such as, well, the purchases from public corporations, from major companies, on the basis of online procurement, and a whole range of measures can be implemented, and we're planning them for the near future, for the next few years. And we, of course, are working in cooperation with the government, because without the government, such measures cannot be implemented. And I believe that this new epoch in the development of digital services, which are based on digital contracts, they will make it possible to create a system of factoring. And these instruments are very important, and they are closely connected with crowdfunding, with digital platforms, and with attracting investment through digital technologies. We are monitoring crowdfunding platforms, and we believe that they have a great potential for development. And most of the banks that now want to be not simply banks, but banking systems, will be interested in developing them so as to give the small and medium businesses all the services, all the support services, of course, with credit being one of the most important ones so far. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for joining us. We know that you are very busy. Please, join us again during the day today and tomorrow. And now I would like to turn to Sberbank and ask you how you survive these difficult months and what you are going to offer to your clients in the future. I haven't introduced Anatoly Popov, Deputy Chairman of the Management Board of Sberbank. Well, if we look back at 4 or 5 months ago, even though it seems that a whole eternity has passed, when at the beginning of March it became clear that there will be some suspension of activities, some countries started introducing restrictive measures, and we took a decision on restructuring in the sectors which we believe to be the branches which had been affected. And it means the existence of the Acueto, when the government, when the enterprise can show what it will be participating in. But if we see that the receipts of the company drop by about 30% fairly quickly, we restructure our banking products to them, and we were able to restructure about 250,000 contracts even in April. And then Mikhail Mamut already mentioned some of the programs, and we existed side by side in April and May because all the programs were drafted and elaborated in the real-time regime, and we granted more than 45 million grants to small and medium enterprises that suffered from the restrictive measures. And on the 1st of June, when the rehabilitation program was launched, then again we signed lots of contracts, the so-called 2% crediting program, and we managed to do most of that work without inviting the clients to the banks. You remember the streets were empty, and we understood that it would be unrealistic to invite our clients, or inviting them could be dangerous. It could pose a risk to their lives. Many people were falling ill, and we succeeded in working a system when we could do without it. You remember that usually the amount of the credit depends on the number of people employed in an enterprise, and we succeeded in working out a system when we actually were able to assess the number of people who worked in an enterprise during the previous months, because such information did not exist. Well, if we now speak about enterprises working in July, you can actually get the information in one click. And I'm sure that such systems will make it possible to provide credits without asking the client to provide many documents. We shall rely on the information which already exists, because we have done it. Now I see that, I think the tension has gone down a little. In the past months, I think some people were alerting me to the situation when a client is not restructuring the credit. Now, such situations don't arise so often, which means that the enterprises that had been hurt by the crisis of the pandemic have been able to rehabilitate themselves a little. And now I would like to go to the credit of settlements when we deal with public procurement contracts. Public procurement contracts account for 27% of the GDP of the country. You know that the GDP of the country has gone down by more than 8%. So it means that almost one-third of the economy depends on government procurement, and about 800 companies are involved in working on government procurement contracts. And that probably means that about one-fifth of companies has some contracts with the government, and you see the figures showing the amount of those contracts, and about 43% account for small businesses, small and medium businesses, and about 57% bigger companies. And that means that about one-fifth of the payments, according to the federal law, the settlement is somewhat belated. And we have already sued about 20,000 people, 20,000 companies for delayed payments, because you understand what it means for a small and medium company. It means it cannot pay the salaries and wages to its people, cannot pay its bills, and so on. And the problem of delayed payments when the settlement is not made in time. The customer actually is provided with the service or with the product, but receives the payment about a month later. There is a lot of litigation between the government and the companies, but this, of course, poses a serious problem and creates a problem for the companies. So we decided that we could introduce the letter of credit system, like the one provided for by the federal law 214, when special accounts are used, escrow accounts, when a person buys a flat, a certain deposit is made by the buyer, but the money is only paid when the construction is completed. And we have opened many escrow accounts for people who are buying housing, and we don't see any slowdown in the construction period. Well, usually, why does construction slow down? If there is some turbulence in the housing market, the demand fluctuates. Well, I would like to add, I travel a lot about the country. When the law was being adopted, people said that if we agree to escrow accounts, everything will be disrupted. I ask now people when I visit them, have you switched to using escrow accounts? And people say, yes, we have, and nothing strange has happened. Yes, and what usually did the construction people have to do? They had to offer discounts to people before those escrow accounts had. And very often the whole situation was disrupted, and very often construction was suspended. But now everything has been sorted out. The bank is funding different stages of construction. You have built the foundation, you have received the money for that, you have done the next stage, you have received the next stage of funding, and all the marketing risks have gone down considerably. And I believe that there will be no people who paid for their flats but didn't receive them, like the situation was in the past. And we have discussed with entrepreneurs and with Mr. Titov, who is the Presidential Commissioner for the Rights of Entrepreneurs. We started thinking of using the same mechanism in public procurement. Well, for example, the person the buyer places the money in an account, in an escrow account, and as soon as the contract is well met, the person who has already discharged his duties receives the money. And we asked the entrepreneurs whether letters of credit could be used, and 59% supported it. About 20% thought that it did not look attractive to business. And when we asked them how many would like to use such an offer from our bank, more than 50% said that they would like to use it. And now you will see a video about how this mechanism works. Let us look at how accessible funding ensures payment in time when we work through letters of credit and escrow accounts. After signing the contract, the buyer places the money in a deposit. The provider of the service discharges the contract, and then the provider of the service receives the money. The solution, the scheme, already is used in construction. The money is paid to the construction business through escrow accounts. Through letters of credit, the buyer can ask for a deferred payment, and even if it was not provided for in the contract, the buyer can ask for it later. Everyone benefits from such a scheme. In conclusion, I would like to say that such a simple system would make it possible to eliminate this tense situation in the public procurement market, which involves thousands of companies, especially the most vulnerable ones, small and medium businesses, which cannot wait for delayed payments for 30 or 31 days, because very many people suffer from this. We hope that the escrow accounts and the letter of credit system can eliminate this situation. I would like to add a few words to it. We, as the Presidential Commissioner for the Rights of Entrepreneurs, very often have to deal with business and sometimes with criminal issues involved in public procurement. Unfortunately, about 1/3 of the entrepreneurs work with public agencies. Ideally, much more should be done in the private sector, purely private sector. But very many requests from the entrepreneurs for payments from municipal authorities and other public bodies. We even had to turn to the procurator's office We monitor the situation. We pay special attention to specific cases. We resolve some, but the overall debt does accumulate. Another problem sometimes is somebody received a credit, but then did not use the credit for the purpose it was provided for, and the procurator's office or the investigation bodies say the credit was used in the wrong way, and it creates a whole knot of problems. And of course, Law 44 does create these problems.
We have been searched for ways and means, and in our cooperation with Sberbank, we see that the escrow accounts or letters of credit help resolve this particular problem, avoid all kinds unpleasantness that may emerge between the customer and the builder. Those who are with us here and those who are watching us online, we are inviting you to please assess and evaluate this kind of new approach. And I do hope that the Ministry of Finance and other government agencies will have a positive response, and that will work as a very important instrument indeed. Anatoly Leonidovich, two of the issues relate directly to you. You already have covered the first one almost, but still, we understand the interest of major suppliers, but how will SMEs be interested if they can do without crediting? And another point, when the state provides subsidy for consumer credit, there seems to be experiencing losses. So how do you view the situation? Let me first consider the situation of payments. Now imagine you supply something to a municipal agency or entity having won the procurement tender, and you supply the necessary goods, everything seems to be in order, and then all of a sudden, and this is a specific situation with most organizations, it seems that there is a gap between the supply and payment, and both functions are being handled by different sets of officials or employees, and it is the letter of credit or the escrow account that takes care of this discrepancy, which means that the money is already there. It could generate an interest, and not so much that the bank is interested in this interest, but it is the transparency that matters, because as soon as you provide the financing, the letter of credit is open in your favor. And this is often accepted, but every organization has those dealing with the finances, and those financial managers have a different vision of the speed the operations are made. But here we see kind of a solution. Let me clarify a point. The federal law provides for the Treasury Office to be in charge of the money, because it seems the money is first frozen in the Treasury funds, and it is the Treasury agency that should actually transfer the funds to the bank. Of course, the money itself is in the Treasury, and it actually takes an exchange of payment orders and requests between the customer and the treasurer. But for this problem, I don't suppose we would have ever attempted this. We do have some pilot projects in regions, and already this has been shown as a tool for eliminating non-payments and overdue payments. Because of the pandemic, everyone is still fearful of an overall collapse. The question is if the state, through its Treasury agency, is involved in the kind of activity which is not really suitable for the state, but those with the digital platform boast that they have managed to eliminate all these intermediaries. It's kind of a seamless platform that is a comprehensive and integrated one. Dear colleagues, as a moderator, seem to be running out of our timing. Since we are in GIMO campus, I would now invite Tatiana Monaghan, Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce, to go online and to describe the kind of international experience and the impact that it has both on the Russian and international economy. Good afternoon, everyone. We do understand that 2020 was the most shocking year for the international business community. Suffice it to refer you to the initial the World Trade Organization forecast of a drastic decrease in the world trade. The COVID-19 pandemic has evolved from a purely medical or health program into an economic one because of huge amount of jobs being threatened and hit. The restriction measures indeed were necessary to preserve public health, but at the same time they proved destructive to the established global supply chains. But we must also be aware of the fact that protectionism has risen worldwide. WTO and other organizations have always preached globalization, but the worst hit is the sector in which SMEs are involved because they were the first to be affected. Their very existence was put in question. Additionally, they suffered as a result of new and not very transparent regulatory measures introduced by different nations. The legal landscape has been changing too. On the one hand, it seems to have supported new supply chains as to ICC, the World Business Organization, then in view of the role of SMEs in developing global economy, in March 2020, we launched a global initiative under the title of Save SMEs. Within this initiative, we urged the government to expediently undertake measures to support enterprises and their employees, including through measures of customs inspection and control. And we, from the very start, called upon the group of 20 leaders to coordinate their actions in order to reinstate a degree of stability and certainty to the world economy. ICC then concluded an unprecedented credit with WHO on a set of measures to assist companies in fighting the pandemic. And we developed a number of advisory papers from the first list of business recommendations on how to best protect their employees, clients, shareholders, to a jointly sponsored by us and the World Confederation of Trade Unions, urging governments to decrease the tax burden in order to prevent default and bankruptcies. Speaking of further measures, we have also developed a set of practical recommendations on fighting the effects of pandemic. Yes, we can see you well enough. Thank you. In order to fight the negative effects of COVID, we have been in close contact with international NGO and civil society organizations. Here in Russia, we have been able to translate the papers that have been developed within our organization, and we sent them to heads of ministries, central bank, businesses. So we have been a very active participant of the process. The Secretary General of our organization in August had a set of meetings to discuss initiatives on fighting the impact of the pandemic, both with the Secretary General of WTO and WHO and with the UN headquarters in Geneva. Tatiana Valerianovna, I'm sorry to interrupt you here. We do appreciate the kind of information you have given us on the international support. We must say goodbye. We have to say goodbye, I'm afraid. Dr. Jörg Kramer, chief economist of Commerzbank Germany, just about 5 minutes on how Germany is fighting the corona crisis. I think you mentioned the effect of banking statistics, how these statistical data are being used by both the real and the financial sectors. Thank you. Спасибо.
Invited to this conference. And I was asked to give you, sorry, I have to. Okay, I will continue. Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for having me invited to this conference. And I was asked to give you an impression on how Germany is fighting the economic fall down of the corona crisis. And parallel to the lockdown in early March, Germany enters what I call the whatever it takes mode. And what does it mean? It means broad-based measures against corona and a comprehensive safety net for companies and their employees. The most important element in the third quarter, we expect the third quarter German GDP to rise by 9%, which is a lot. However, from here on, I think from the second quarter onward, the economic upward movement should slow down somewhat because the lower hanging fruits in manufacturing were already reaped. And but you should not forget that 8% of the economy, next chart, is made up of corona-sensitive service sectors like trade fairs, hotels, etc., which will suffer, which will continue to suffer under corona as long as we have a broad-based vaccination of the population. But this takes time until the autumn of next year. That means what we have seen is a sharp recovery in manufacturing, a sharp recovery in overall GDP in the third quarter, 9% GDP growth. But from now on, the recovery will slow down significantly, and it will take until the end of next year, probably, before we reach the pre-crisis GDP level. But overall, you may say that the corona-related recession is not as deep as previously feared. This is partly due to government support and by the support of the German banking sector for the German corporates. Thank you. That's on my side.
Thank you, Dr. Kremer. I would now like to invite Elena Nikolaevna, your view of what could be done by the real sector of the economy.
Вы знаете, это очень хорошо, что мы сегодня вообще подняли вопрос банков, потому что действительно, когда все встало, рухнуло, остановилось, то банки оказались, в принципе, тем звеном, который не дал совсем обрушиться экономике вообще в целом. И я могу сказать, что с одной стороны мы понимаем, что да, они проделали колоссальную работу. С другой стороны, я вам могу сказать, что если каждого предпринимателя отдельно спросить и сказать, вот как они оценивают работу банков, то они, очень многие будут говорить: ужас, кошмар, это было невыносимо, мы пробивались, мы пытались, многие были расстроены, потому что, имея даже по 20 лет счета в банке, получили от банков списки там из 50
accounts
позиций,
at the
какие
banks
документы нужно
for
представить,
about
чтобы
20
подтвердить,
years, but we received long lists of documents which we were to provide to the bank in order to get the measures of support. The situation was difficult, and we were surveying businessmen, and many did not receive any measures of support, and for them, well, actually, we know that the position of government was that everyone should get some measures of support. But if you speak about 2% or 0% credits or subsidies, only the most those who suffered the most. No one knew about their Cuedo and had no information about them, so most were unable to benefit from it. So if you don't, so the entrepreneur says, well, the bank has not provided a credit for me. When you start explaining that it's a decision of the government, for them it is the bank, because this is where the entrepreneurs keep their money. So now when we are analyzing this experience, there are several things. Why is a Cuedo necessary? We have believed that banks, whom most of the businessmen trust their money, trust with their money, the banks would be able to decide whether they should support some entrepreneur or not. Well, what I liked in the product which Sberbank has offered, I'm not sure it will be able to do it under Federal Law 44, but in terms of trust, in terms of undoing the knots which we have, because many people have great uncertainty about different things, and if banks act as centers of stability when they provide the guarantees, it will make it possible for banks to help get the economy moving. We have already held the 5th banking contest. And entrepreneurs are formulating a different request from banks. They want banks to earn not on what they do for business, but they want to earn together with business, because banks will take over the duties which are burdensome for the enterprise, and they want the banks to do it not for a certain payment, but simply because we keep the money in this bank, and the bank should be doing its part, its bit. So the more this develops, the more we shall feel that banks will be necessary for many years to come. We know what Gref has predicted, that banks will cease to exist as an institution. So switching to this new format, when we don't have to go to the bank to provide some information about ourselves, when the banks will know everything about us, then we shall be much stronger. Both business and banks will be stronger, because we shall have a common cause, and the common cause is to ensure that our economy and our entrepreneurship develop dynamically. And now let us once again seek to invite our foreign participant, who is Istvan Lengyel, Secretary General of the Banking Association for Central and Eastern Europe, about some measures which were undertaken and which were very beneficial for the economy, for its rehabilitation. Thank you, colleagues. As a former graduate of MGIMO, I'm very glad to participate in this discussion, and I would like to follow up on what Elena Nikolaevna said. The partnership relations with banks are the key to stability. And I think that banks have come to this situation better prepared than they were in 2008. And now banks are not part of the problem, but part of the solution of the problem. What were the trends in the work of the banks since the coronavirus pandemic began? I would probably say that the first one was support for the people working in the bank, support for the clients and for the public. To begin with, creating the conditions that would be safe for the banking officers. The bank branches were closed down, so they had to work from the home office. Of course, also the support for the partners of the bank. Banks were participating in different government programs, in implementing these programs. They were different in Eastern Europe, and I will quote Hungary's experience. We declared that there would be a full tax vacation for all entrepreneurs, for small, big, and medium businesses. businesses since of the 3rd of January. Problems will emerge with the credit portfolio, but we shall delay the solving these problems. Banks also were distributing government subsidies, and they did it successfully, and trust to the banks has grown in these months. Banks developed new products. And again, what was successfully used in the sphere of payments, almost all over Europe, limits on contact, no contact payments were eased. That is about 50 euros can be paid without using the code number. We also developed a system of payments. It's a whole environment. All the payments in Hungary, inside the country, are done within 5 seconds. And of course, it provides some advantages. We shall not speak about the problems that also exist, but the first experience of using this was very useful during the pandemic. Mobile applications are also becoming more widely used, and banks started using them very quickly. And overall, the banks ensured the uninterrupted provision of services. As for the digital economy and digital services, development, of course, goes in one direction, which is known as platform banking in English. And again, I would like to stress what Elena Nikolaevna said. Banks as centers of stability and a bank as a partner, this idea is very important. And the appearance of a bank on the internet, a platform is created, and on these platforms, banks can provide their services. So there are elements of self-service. The clients can choose what services they would like to use. Sorry, we have to interrupt you. Unfortunately, we are very much behind the schedule, and we would like to hear our last speaker too. Last but not least, thank you very much for sharing your experience with us. And now we shall listen to Mr. Steinhauer. And since you will be our last speaker, could you please tell us how the system has changed now? What new products will be developed? What new products will be in demand? Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Of course, no one is a prophet, but nevertheless, we are looking into the future and making our projections. And I would like to make 3 points. To begin with, I would like to say that the business models will be overhauled and reviewed and changed globally. Because of the lack of time, I cannot speak in more detail about it. But sustainable development will be playing a more important role, while now it is sometimes only used as an advertising slogan. The second thing that will have to happen is a new adjustment of the system of the distribution of risks. Some government programs have already been articulated, which provide that 70% of the risk, sometimes in Germany, 80% of the risk is borne by the government. But the rest is borne by the bank. And here some confidence to the bank may be falling. So the distribution of risks between companies, the government, and the banks will be redistributed. The distribution will be changing. And also, the important thing is who will be able to organize effective processes of managing business and offer products which are in demand and manage them effectively. In Russia, there are very efficient actors, and one of them is the representative of Sberbank. We work with about 2,000 banks in the world, all over the world, and I can say that we have something to learn from Sberbank. So it's the question of the efficiency of the business model, where everything is taken into account, the risks, the profit, and everything. And the profit is something which is important for two sides of the process. If only one side gets the profit, then the model will not be stable, it will not be sustainable, and it will have no future. I think that at this optimistic note, even without the moderator's concluding word, we can complete our discussion and put an end to it. And I would like to say that besides us, about 128,000 people have been watching us. Well, this is how many people have been with us. Thank you.